going to talk about flour today and its importance to the baker with regards to what it does depending on the items that we want to make. Over here we have the wheat berry, which is essentially where we derive our wheat flour from. Depending on where it is that this wheat is coming from, depending on the variety of wheat, depending on the time of year even sometimes, we get these differences in the protein content. We get some hard wheats, we get some soft wheats. That's going to determine what the protein is based on what, depending on what it is that we want to make here. High gluten flour, okay, so it has the highest quantity of protein. We're looking at something close to 13–14%. Sometimes they go up as high as 15%. And then on our lower spectrum, we have our cake flour, which is right here. You can see that it's a bit whiter. We're looking at sometimes 6–7% protein content there. And then this one right over here would be our whole wheat flour, which is essentially the wheat berry, just milled. This has a bearing with regards to nutrition, okay, the bran, the germ. And also because those things are in there and they have a certain quantity of fat to them, they actually cut down our gluten structure, right? Or that protein content gets reduced. So we end up with a product that may be a little bit softer. The rye flour in particular, as we can see here, has a very gritty texture to it. It has a specific type of protein which doesn't focus so much on the stretchiness of the bread or the elasticity of it. It focuses more on the binding quality of it. So we end up with a bread that is denser and tighter crumbed. Now that we kind of understand what the protein content of these flours were rather, okay, and kind of like where they're coming from, we need to kind of move into the next stage, which would be to hydrate these flours, mix them properly, and we should be able to then kind of see what that difference in protein amongst these different flours will do to our final product. This is just plain water. Obviously, depending on what I'm making, there's going to be other ingredients involved. But in this case, just mixing the flour with water will kind of give a demonstration of what's happening. If we were to add yeast to this, for example, in the making of bread, and let this sit for a number of hours, overnight, even days, what starts to happen is that, number one, the yeast will start consuming the carbohydrates in our flour, and it creates some movement, right? It's a small molecular level of kind of agitation. So this is actually this mixture here that has probably been going for a week, maybe 2 weeks, and there's actually some yeast in it. This was made actually with high gluten flour, so we talked about that very high protein content. So we can see that this stretchiness is an indication, right? This elasticity is an indication of high protein content. Over here, rye flour, which again has a very high protein content, but it doesn't have that protein that we spoke of. This one is more of a binding protein, and we can see that if I actually pull this, it breaks fairly quickly. There's a difference with the elasticity here. And then on the final, maybe lower end, we can see cake flour, which is the lowest in protein content, okay? And usually we're using this for lighter items, cookies, muffins, cakes, that sort of stuff. We don't want a lot of structure in these products. We want them to be very delicate. This is actually muffin batter. So there are other ingredients in here, fats. There's eggs in here, there's dairy in here. And those things have an impact on the protein content and the gluten development of these flours as well. And we can see that this is just a very loose mixture, okay, or batter. We're going to now look at the finished product so that we can better understand what the varieties of flour and their protein content has done for us in the baking process. We're going to start with, this is actually a whole wheat loaf. We've utilized whole wheat flour in it, but also high gluten. And what we can see here is we can see open air structure. It's a very soft and spongy bread. And then this is another bread that we've actually made also with some high gluten flour, but it's predominantly rye. In fact, probably 60% of the flour that we utilize in this bread is rye. Very dense, this bread, much tighter air bubble structure. Rye is very important for us because it provides a very complex flavoring to our bread. And then finally, what I have over here would be a cupcake. Which was made with the cake flour. So very low gluten content, very low protein, very soft, very crumbly, the texture itself. And that's just a good example of what the low protein content would end up doing. Flours come in a lot of different varieties. flavors, colors, and textures, and you should be able to pick the one that you want based on what it is that you're trying to prepare. There are organic versions of the wheat flours that we just spoke of, as well as gluten-free versions. In this case, we have teff, we have oat, we have almond flour. Teff flour is good because it has no gluten, and this is very important for people who suffer from celiac disease or gluten intolerance. And oat and almond in particular are flours that you as a consumer can make at home on your own. Depending on what you want, you should certainly get out there. Experimenting is really the best way to figure out what it is that you would want to try. You're going to get different flavors, you're going to get different textures, even different smells, just based on what it is that you're trying here.